My father looked across the dining room table at his boss, a man named Richard Callaway, CEO of the firm he had spent 11 years trying to impress, and said, with a laugh that was meant to land as charming, "Oh, Mia handles all of this. She doesn't mind. She's just built that way." 14 people heard that. Richard Callaway. His wife. 3 senior partners and their spouses. My mother, who smiled and reached for her wine. "My name is Mia Donovan. I am 26 years old. This is the story of how my father spent 6 years presenting my labor as his hospitality, my cooking as his taste, and my invisible work as evidence of his good life, until the man he was performing it all for looked across that same table and recognized exactly what he was seeing." What Richard Callaway said next ended the performance permanently. I grew up in a clean, well-furnished house in Naperville, Illinois, where appearances were the primary currency and effort was distributed along very clear lines. My father, Dennis Donovan, was a senior account manager who treated our home the way he treated his client presentations: everything polished, nothing genuine, and someone behind the scenes making it all work. That someone was me. My mother, Lynn, had a part-time bookkeeping job and a full-time investment in my father's career trajectory. She cooked when she felt like it, which was less often as the years went on, and she had a talent for framing my contributions as natural, just Mia being Mia, just how our household runs. She was not cruel about it. She was comfortable with it, which was its own kind of cruelty. My brother Kevin, 4 years older, had left for college and then Chicago, and then a life that didn't include Sunday dinner prep. He called on birthdays. My father described him at every opportunity as independent. He described me as reliable, which in our house meant available. By the time I was 20, I was managing the household the way a person manages a job they were never hired for. Groceries, meals, cleaning, scheduling my father's dry cleaning pickups, preparing the house before his work guests arrived. When he hosted dinners, which happened 6 or 8 times a year, always for people who could advance his career, I cooked everything, plated everything, and then sat at the edge of the table while he received the compliments. He never corrected anyone who thanked him for the meal. The first time I said something about it directly, I was 22. My father had a Friday dinner for 3 colleagues, and I had spent the previous 2 evenings cooking. One of the guests told my father the short rib was extraordinary. My father said, "I've always believed a good meal sets the tone." I looked at him from across the table. He did not look back. Afterward, in the kitchen, I told him quietly that it would have meant something if he'd mentioned I had cooked it. He said, "Mia, these are professional relationships. You don't understand how this works." I dried my hands on the dish towel and went to my room. I did not push further. The second moment was the following spring. I had been offered a coordinator position at a nonprofit in the city. Real work, a real salary, a start. I told my parents at dinner. My mother said that was exciting. My father cut his food and said, "That's fine for now, but we'd need to work out the schedule. I have the Henderson account dinner in April, and you know how much prep that takes." He said it like it was a scheduling conflict. Like my job was a variable and his dinner was a fixed point. I said the dinner was 6 weeks away, and I was sure we could manage it. He said, "Let's revisit when the time comes." He said it pleasantly. He moved on. I took the job. I also kept cooking his dinners. Because I didn't yet know how to name what was happening clearly enough to stop it. The third moment was in October. I had worked a full week, come home Friday exhausted, and found a note on the kitchen counter in my mother's handwriting: "Dennis has clients Saturday at 7. Need the salmon dish and the good napkins out. Thanks, Hon." I stood in the kitchen holding that note for a long time. No question mark. No actual question at all. Just an instruction dressed up as a note. I made the salmon. I put out the good napkins. I sat in my room while my father's colleagues told him it was a wonderful evening. The dinner that crossed the line was November, the one my father had been building toward for months. Richard Callaway, the CEO of his firm, was coming. My father had mentioned it 11 times in 3 weeks. He had specific requests. Beef tenderloin. The good plates. A particular centerpiece he had seen somewhere, and wanted me to replicate. He said this dinner could move him into consideration for a regional director role. I spent 3 days preparing. I want to be specific about that: 3 days of grocery sourcing, prep work, cooking, plating design, table arrangement. I took Friday off from my actual job to finish it. I did not tell my father I'd done that. The dinner was 14 guests. Everything I had made was on that table. And 20 minutes into the main course, my father laughed and said what he said. "She's just built that way." I looked at my plate. My hands were in my lap. My jaw was tight. And Richard Callaway, across the table, looked at my father for a moment and then looked at me. I excused myself to get more water from the kitchen. I stood at the sink for a moment. The faucet was running, and I let it run. I looked at the serving dishes I had spent 3 days preparing, stacked on the counter waiting to go back out. I turned off the faucet. I went back to the table. Sat down. Finished the dinner. Said nothing. Drove home to my apartment I had moved out 8 months earlier, which my father had framed as an inconvenience, and sat on my couch in the dark. I thought about 6 years. I thought about every dinner, every note on the counter, every compliment my father had received for food he hadn't touched before it was plated. I thought about the Henderson account dinner, and the salmon dish, and the word reliable used as a leash. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there and let it settle. Then I opened my laptop and I started writing it down. All of it. Every dinner, every date I could remember, every dish. A document. Specific. Dated where I could date it. I wrote for 2 hours and went to sleep. The next morning I had a voicemail. It was from Richard Callaway's executive assistant, asking if I would be available for a brief call with Mr. Callaway at my convenience. I called back the same day. Richard answered himself. He said he had looked me up after the dinner, my LinkedIn, my work at the nonprofit, which had been doing strong grant work I had helped coordinate. He said he had a question he wanted to ask directly. Had I been responsible for the food and preparation at my father's dinner events over the years? I said yes. I told him how many. I told him for how long. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been to 4 of those dinners. I want you to know I've been attributing them to the wrong person." He offered me an interview for a community development coordinator role at his firm's foundation, a newly created position, $67,000 base, full benefits. He said he had seen my grant summary work through a mutual contact, and had been looking for the right person for 3 months. I said I was interested. I scheduled the interview. I did not tell my father. I interviewed on a Thursday. Richard's foundation director, a woman named Susan Park, ran the session. It lasted 90 minutes. She called me the following Tuesday with an offer. I accepted on Wednesday. That Sunday was my parents' weekly dinner. I went. My father was in a good mood. Richard's visit had gone well. He'd heard positive signals about the director role. He was expansive at the table, generous with the bread, the version of himself he was when things were going his way. After the main course, I told them I had taken a new position. My mother asked where. I told her the name of Richard Callaway's foundation. My father put down his fork. I told him Richard had reached out the morning after the dinner. I told him about the 4 dinners Richard had attended over the years. I told him what Richard had said, that he had been attributing them to the wrong person. My father's face did not collapse. It went still in the way that faces go still when something has shifted and the person knows it and can't find the move. My mother looked at him. Then at me. She said quietly, "Richard called you." I said, "The morning after. He'd looked me up." My father said, "Mia, I don't think you understand what this could I said I start in 2 weeks. I finished my food. I thanked my mother for dinner which she had actually cooked that Sunday, for the first time in months. I got my coat. I drove home. My father called me 4 times in the week after that Sunday. The first 2 I let go to voicemail. The messages were about optics, about how it would look, about Richard being his CEO, about how I should have consulted him. Not about what he had done. About what I was doing. The third call I answered. He said, "You're putting my career in a difficult position." I said, "You built your career on my work, Dad. I found a way to get credit for it." That's not the same thing. He was quiet. Then he said I was being dramatic. I said I'd talk to him when he was ready to have a different conversation. I hung up. The fourth call I didn't answer. The voicemail was softer. He said he hadn't realized how it had looked to me. He said he hoped I knew he was proud of me. I listened to it once. I didn't call back. My mother came to my apartment 2 weeks after I started the new job. She brought food, the salmon dish, the one from the note. She set it on my counter and sat at my kitchen table and said she was sorry. She said she had told herself it was just how the family worked, and she hadn't let herself look at it clearly. She said that wasn't good enough. She cried a little. I made tea. We sat for an hour. It wasn't a resolution. It was a beginning, which is a different thing, and I decided it was enough for now. Richard Callaway saw my father at a firm meeting 3 weeks after I started. My father told me, in a later conversation, that Richard had said, "You have a remarkable daughter." He said it in front of 4 colleagues. My father said he had nodded and said thank you. I thought about that for a moment when he told me. Then I let it go. I work at the foundation now. The work is real. The salary is real. My name is on the reports. I lost 6 years of dinners I cooked for a room that didn't know my name. I lost the version of my mother I had wanted, the one who would have noticed sooner. I lost the particular exhaustion of making someone else's life look good while building nothing of my own. What I gained is Susan Park as a manager who knows exactly who wrote what. A desk with my name plate on it. The knowledge that the work was always good enough, it was just credited to the wrong person. My father called me built that way. He wasn't wrong. He just didn't understand what that meant when I finally decided to build something for myself. Richard Callaway looked across the dinner table and saw what my father had spent 6 years making invisible. All it took was one person paying attention.